Okay, Tom, do you want to carry on?
Yeah. So I think one of those concerns was you were saying that you see it as a problem that you have to choose a plugin to implement host port mappings.
Basically, the caller has to. Yeah, basically the caller has to know like this plugin supports it and that plugin doesn't.
Yeah, indeed. But I don't think there's any way around that, because otherwise you don't know whether your host ports are going to be applied or not.
I mean, like that could be part of the return code, right?
Well, part of what return code? Like what plugin is going to say that I've just ignored information that you've passed me? Like,
yes, or return exactly what you did. Like when you return the address that you set up, also return the ports that you mapped, right? Like, and then like as it currently is implemented, as I understand it, with the caveat that I didn't review it, so like I may be wrong in the details. Kubernetes has no idea which CNI driver it's really using, and it has no idea which drivers support or don't support this. So the only thing we could do would be to try each driver in sequence with and without that parameter.
Kubernetes has one particular driver that's configured.
For now, but other people deploy their own drivers. Right? I mean, you wrote your Docker one, which I still...
Right. But the kubelet reads one, and it only tries one.
Well, there's this other proposal for chaining them together, being able to specify in a network config that actually I need 3 different drivers to run in sequence.
All right, but even so, the kubelet will still know which ones it's doing.
Sure, it will know which ones it's doing, but is kubelet supposed to keep a map of which ones do and don't support host ports? Obviously, that isn't tenable. Otherwise, I would have built the drivers in, right?
I could buy an argument for saying that host port is recognized as an optional feature. So maybe the CNI driver should have a way of saying, I did everything except your host port. And then Kubernetes can have a way of reporting that back to the user.
That's exactly what I was hoping for. So being able to return that like as the result means then kubelet could just pack the host port's information into every create call, and if nobody reported it, then kubelet could report an error, or it could do it itself, or it could ignore it. It would be a choice for the runtime, but it doesn't mean that I...
So that's something that we could explore, but that's not a proposal that is against CNI at the moment. There's no way of doing that right now. So that's a design that we could look at, but I think within the current CNI interface that we have, the convention of passing that information in as network config rather than as optional args is a better way of doing it.
Okay, we can take it to the GitHub on this. Maybe Minhan and I afterwards will try to write up a potential proposal here. I don't see how, as it's implemented, it's usable. If I have to know details about my plugin, it's not a plugin.
Well, but someone has to know details about their plugin, right? Is it, a user has to be selected what plugins they're using, and maybe Kubernetes is choosing some default plugins that it wants to use that, it's going to package up or something, but there's still, someone has to know, someone's making that decision. So if Kubernetes wants host port mapping functionality and host port mapping is provided by a separate plugin, then Kubernetes needs to choose which host port mapping plugin is going to provide that functionality, and therefore it can provide the host port maps as part of the config for that plugin.
Except that it's not Kubernetes that decides it, right? It's an end user who writes a network config or something when they drop a third-party plugin in.
So then there's a challenge of how does Kubernetes provide that information? How does Kubernetes provide those host port mapping the configuration or the the user's choice of which plugin they want to use.
I should provide them to them all and let them tell me whether one of them accepted it or not.
Right. I mean, that's one possible design though.
All right.
I'm getting lost a little here between the operator and the end user. I mean, currently the one config that gets read is provided by the operator, not the end user.
That's correct. But there's
chaining proposals. Is it proposed that end users have control over what gets chained, or still is this an operator thing?
No, it's still an operator thing. You define a network in terms of a chain of plugins.
Right. Okay. So it would be the So I think this has an orthogonality problem. The end user, operators want to be able to not require the users to have cluster-specific input. So, yeah, the question is, what can the users write that works on all the clusters? And right. So I think the argument here is what they've done is they've said supporting host ports is a mandatory feature, and you're saying it would be better if it were an optional feature. And I agree, it would be better if it's an optional feature.
Okay, we'll take this through the CNI.
And follow that conclusion.
I don't want to burn the whole meeting on this. Thank you for the update. The Kubernetes side is almost done, right? We have our checkpoint and stuff.
Yeah.
So that PR is pending and it's almost done.
Are there still any open questions in that checkpointing about how much information needs to be checkpointed?
Right now, essentially, it's the port mapping information and the sandbox ID. Basically, it's the CNI container ID.
Right. Okay. I'm not sure because there were some CNI issues around how much information needs to be provided on the delete.
Yes. So that's what I intended to have on the CNI side. Basically, I wanted to, for Kubernetes, we just remember the ID, the container ID, and that's it, because that's what existed, and then Kubernetes should memorize it. And the rest is like either come from user config, right? Like what plugin you use, and then what's the CNI path and stuff like that. And then the rest, I feel like it's cleaner for the CNI plugin to checkpoint it, and then just
I think the CNI plugin authors would disagree. So if all plugins have to start checkpointing a lot of information. So I think there's further discussion to be had on that stuff, and we should probably do it on the CNI GitHub issues as well.
That sounds reasonable to me, having only the ID. Just one quick question on the delete aspect of it. If the delete fails, does the CNI driver will continue to retry the delete? Is that the idea?
Nope, that's not the idea.
Okay, so because in that case, we might have a problem in some corner cases. I had pointed this out on the CNI GitHub as one of the issues related to your issue submission. So somebody from Cloud Foundry said that's how they do it. Basically, if the delete fails, they will continuously keep retrying the delete until like a state sync loop, essentially.
I think we would end up retrying it, right? If the CNI delete failed, we would not clear the checkpoint, and we would continue to report that this thing still exists, and we would then retry it, but not in the driver. You don't expect the driver itself to autonomously retry, but the higher level orchestrator would retry.
Would do that? Okay.
But to the question of whether plugins should checkpoint or not, we have already an alternate implementation where Kubelet will do its own checkpointing, so we can live with the API as it is, and we can let the discussion happen at whatever pace that wants to happen. And then if in the end CNI does something to make Kubelet's life easier, then great, and if not, that's fine too.
All right. So it sounds like there are a couple issues there on the CNI repo that people can chime in to further that discussion. And I'll stick links to those in the meeting minutes. Shall we move on to network policy? There are a couple threads
Yes.
there. So the first being the service selector thread, where Tim, I know you just responded shortly before the meeting. Not sure.
Yes, I assume everybody read and digested my full response in the 4 minutes that I had left you before the meeting. No, I mean, I read over the very thoughtful responses from Alex and Casey and Thomas and others, and I thank you all for that. And I'm trying to rationalize what I think we should do. My recommendation at this point is that we do not make any fundamental changes to network policy API at this point, which would leave it clear to go GA, with the possible exception that maybe we want to consider adding a service name as a one-of option with pod selector. We can take that as a separate discussion. Like, we should go ahead and move the API as it exists to V1. I know Dan Winship has a PR out for that, so we can go give that some love now. And then we can consider whether we want to add a service name in addition in the same movement, or whether we want to hold off on that until V1.7 Kubernetes. We also have the open proposal to add a CIDR as a source, which we've sort of postponed until we were all happy and stable with the API. I think we can consider those two options as to whether or not we want to put them in 1.6. But I would not at this point recommend changing network policy in the way that, like, in the dramatic way of removing pod selector. I think that would have too deleterious an effect on all the implementations. And I've always wanted to use deleterious in a meeting.
That's an awesome word.
So given that, thank you, Alex. Given that there's a separate proposal that I linked to, which is some of the API machinery guys are proposing to add discriminators to all one-of blocks in the API, because it makes things like Swagger much easier. We may yet need to tweak what we're doing if we want to extend it to a one-of, but that will be a relatively minor tweak and not semantically meaningful, just API.
Yeah, but every even minor syntactic change is a hell of a pain.
Understand. We can have that discussion as to whether this one gets grandfathered in. It's not GA yet, so at some point, anybody who's moving their network policy object has to go through and change them from beta to GA anyway, beta to V1. And if they're doing that, perhaps adding an extra, level of indent is not too onerous. But let's wait for a PR on that. There's not a decision made on the discriminators. One of the proposals is to actually just do it through the struct tag decorations and not require any syntactic change.
All right. I wanted to add one thing. I'm afraid I haven't had a chance to catch up on all the discussion yet. But one thing that's been kind of bugging me is I see kind of a drift towards I'm not quite sure how to put it without being too pejorative or
don't hold back.
Narrow. Well, what I'm trying to say is one of the things I really liked about Kubernetes, as I found it when I re-examined it early last year, was it was very open and composable. For example, I didn't have to use services, right? And Kelsey made this point at the last KubeCon, right? And I have colleagues who have stuff that's using Netflix OSS. They use Eureka. They don't need no stinking Kubernetes services, right?
Right.
So I don't want to build in the idea that Kubernetes services are the only way to solve the relevant problems.
Okay.
So I just wanted to speak for continuing to keep it open and composable. Pay attention as we it's difficult as you build more functionality. You want to rely on other things. It's natural to get incestuous and start to get to there's only one way to do things because we know how to build on that. But it does destroy the open and composable nature, which is ultimately very valuable.
Okay, that is a duly noted point. From that position, if we were to add an alternate service name to go alongside pod selector, and you could choose either one. Does that, in your opinion, break composability, or is it just an optional thing that you can ignore if you don't want it?
Well, so far you've only described syntax, not semantics. And as I noted last week, we could actually get into some subtle semantic trouble. So I haven't finished thinking through what I would actually recommend there.
Okay. Well, it's good that we don't have a PR open then. I will focus my attention on getting the V1 PR approved. And once that's approved, we can offer this as a potential change on top of that, and we can discuss its merits in its own request.
Okay.
So given that, if we can get all the I's dotted and T's crossed, it looks like network policy can go GA in 1.6. We've got 3-4-ish weeks to get that all wrapped up.
Yep, and that PR where we do that is in the agenda doc right now. It's 39164.
Right, that's just 1 or 2 more meetings of this group, so we'll have to really focus on that if we want to really reach a consensus on that.
Well, I'm hoping that the PR is uncontroversial since it's basically just renaming the API version. We're not making any change in that PR.
No, there is one change in that PR.
Okay.
Which, to deal with the empty versus nil thing, we added an extra layer, an extra struct that was optional.
Yes.
So that's
yes, you're right. We need to resolve that. Okay. Well, other than that, there are no API changes, and that one's been cooking for a long time. So we'll just hash it out, get this PR in, and then see if we have any time for any additional changes there. I expect the move to GA, the burden of the work to be mostly in the docs and in the making sure that the tests we're happy with and those sorts of things.
Yep.
Cool.
So let's hash that out on the PR. There was another issue on the mailing list. I'm not sure if we want to discuss it now about namespace selectors. Dan Winship raised it. Unless there's more conversation people want to have, I'd suggest we continue on that thread.
Yeah, I haven't read that thread yet.
Sounds good. So there were a couple DNS proposals. One which was DNS per namespace, and I forget who had submitted that.
That was a colleague of mine.
Right. Are you?
Oh, sorry, I'm on here. Yeah, he's unable to. He's in the Chinese time zone, so he couldn't be on the call. But we kind of left off with diving into a sort of organization type of thing that rides over top of different types of things like DNS. It would allow you to combine together 1 or 2 namespaces and then only provide DNS for that combined namespace set. So I'm not sure where we wanted to go from there. Mike, you kind of left off with a couple of further explanations on that.
Right, well, we discussed this in SIG Auth. We discussed this in SIG Auth earlier in the week. The problem was that people looking at this PR realized it's really just a baby step towards something bigger, and they wanted really a consensus on where we're going to go before we start with a baby step, so to make sure I think that it's a baby step in the right direction. So this gets back to the multi-tenancy discussion, and SIG Auth, I emphasize, as I think I've mentioned here before, that I'm hearing from colleagues who are developers in organizations that are in the SaaS business. So they really have a 2-dimensional notion of tenancy. So you can't just tell them there are namespaces and then groups of namespaces with isolation between groups of namespaces, because that doesn't solve their problem. They want controlled access between the rows and columns of their matrix. Again, say one dimension is they have different SaaS offerings, and the other is they have different customers. So that makes a matrix when you put them together. And they want controlled access. So the idea is you could put a namespace at each cell in the matrix. They want to have control over the access between particular cells. They want to have control over who can control that access. So this really goes together with both. There's kind of an RBAC discussion to be had, as well as an API and network policy and DNS discussion to be had.
That sounds nice and easy. Okay, is there anything to discuss here, or is the relevant context really in that thread? And is there anything we can do in the short term to make what you want to do possible without cutting off our nose to spite our face?
Yeah, so I submitted, I encouraged my colleagues to submit this baby step thinking that it was a step in the right direction. But apparently I haven't convinced very many people. So in fact, I come to realize, particularly in the discussion with SIG auth, we really do have some collusions here. So for example, the way things are expressed in terms of API access is in some sense egress. It's who can, for a given thing, well, maybe it's the same. It's actually, let me think about this. No, it's really for a given user, what can he access, right? So that's more like egress filtering on the network side. So we currently have a way of expressing control in the API and control in the network, and no expressing control in DNS. But the two ways we've gone about it in the API and the network are in the opposite direction. So we have to figure out whether there really is a duality we can exploit here or not. And it was pointed out in the SIG auth discussion that there really is a big alignment between the need to look up stuff in DNS and the need to look up, be able to open network connections, right? Because it was noted because someone already has in OpenShift, they've already got some implementation, and it's inherently aligned. Their control on the network access directly leads to their control on the DNS lookup ability. So I haven't finished thinking through what I learned in that discussion, so I don't have much more to say now.
Okay. I have a lot to digest in that thread, and I'm not current on it. So I also have a lot to think about. So maybe nothing actionable at this time.
Yeah, sounds like people should digest that doc some more and keep the discussion there.
But please know that while we can talk about the future of multi-tenancy in Kubernetes, if we can get through that and figure out that there's a short-term solution, then we should absolutely consider that. I just don't know what it is.
Right, but the thing that I think that was really emphasized in the SIG auth discussion is there's, I think, again, the unity between DNS and network, and really it seems to me there ought to be a unity between all three. And right now we have this opposite ways of going about it. So I'm really not sure what to recommend right now.
Okay. Next.
Yep, moving on. So next on the list was documentation.
So one of our docs guys, Steve, was going to join us today, but he can't because apparently our court people installed something that won't let him run Zoom now. So one more vote for running something in the browser, please. God, please. That doesn't require external binaries. We can discuss that separately. So what Steve sent to me, let me put that up on my screen here, was a list of example docs. So we went through our, boy, the screen is small. I went through all of our example docs, and I found a bunch of network-related documentation. And I asked him, rather than divvying up the existing docs and making them better, what should we do? And his general answer was, don't make the docs better in place. We should use the new templates. So I just got his notice that he couldn't come about 5 minutes before we started. So he sent me a list of example docs that are the tasks, which is how you do some specific thing. Tutorials, which is I think it's slightly larger in scope, and concepts. I will take his email with his examples, and I will share it back to the SIG this afternoon with a cross-reference to all of our docs, and then we need to go through our docs and try to break them up into tasks and tutorials and concepts. I feel like this is a pretty heavy meeting to do that. Does it make sense to pull a couple of volunteers to meet on a smaller scale and try to divvy up the docs into a new structure and then solicit help in filling in the content? I mean, I'm happy to do it here. I just feel like there's 30 people on the call and it doesn't really make sense to spend time talking about docs in detail.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question? In that trichotomy, is there a place for like reference manual type material?
I think concept is that. Concept is closest to the sort of encyclopedia entry, which is what we've got today for docs.
Yeah, my concern is that it's close but not there, right? I mean, there needs to be a place where we write down all the exact details, right? And users need a way to find that stuff.
So I wish Steve were here. There's some theory that users don't actually need to find those things, that either operators do or engineers do who work on the project, but not necessarily end users. The indictment that we've gotten on a lot of our docs is there's a ton of material in there that almost nobody ever needs to read, especially end users. And I can't disagree with that because we write engineering docs. But I don't have a real answer to your real question, Mike.
Yeah, my real question is, it's one thing to think about people kicking the tires, and yeah, they don't need to know all the details because they're not going to explore every corner. But as soon as you get to serious users, and they're writing higher level stuff for which this is just the platform, right? They're coding the next higher level. They need to know all the details for real.
That's true. Let me send out the links to all the example docs, things that he considers to be good and well written. And if we don't feel that these are appropriate places for that level of detail, then we can go back to Steve and the docs crew and say, well, what about this level of information?
Okay.
All right. I will share this list, cross-reference with my list of our docs this afternoon. I took a note.
Great, sounds good. And yeah, I think just going back a couple points, I agree that maybe a smaller working group to meet and discuss this would be good.
Volunteers? How about 4 people? I'll sign up.
I'll sign up. Sure.
Doctor.
I know.
Anybody? Come on, I know you guys want to stare at our docs. I'm not asking you to write them. I'm just asking you to read them and help me sort them.
How much work is it over what period of time?
I imagine it's maybe an hour of prep and an hour of discussion and maybe a redux beyond that of an additional hour.
Okay, I'll do that.
All right. And Matt over here signed up too. That's 4. Cool. We will take it to email. We'll find a time to get together, and we'll do that in the next week or 2, with a goal of having an actionable plan by this meeting next time. Okay?
Cool. Sounds good. So let's move on. We had update on IPv6 planning on the list.
Yep. That's me. Can you guys hear me? I'm on my phone.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. Hey, this is Chris Marino. Thanks. Yeah, just a very quick update on this. I missed last meeting, and I volunteered to just capture some ideas and thoughts before the holiday on the priorities for IPv6 and so forth. A couple of folks volunteered, and I've got a little email alias that I've used a couple of times. Anyway, the short update is I think I bit off more than I can chew after simply listing some very obvious and rudimentary use cases and listing the obvious areas of necessary enhancement and relevant RFCs. I kind of realized that I didn't have enough detail to take this to the next level. So I sort of asked for some help among the group, and Chris from Tigera generously volunteered to help share this burden. And we're probably going to tackle a little bit more of it in the next 2 weeks. So I don't know if Chris is on the call right now. Maybe he wants to say anything. But that's pretty much all we've got so far.
All right. Well, it's further along than we were 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago.
Cool. Thanks for the update. Yeah, I don't think Chris is in the office right now. Shall we do microservices follow-up and the ingress proposal?
Do we have you gotten any traction? I have had zero time for that in the last 2 weeks.
I have had one comment on the doc in the last 2 weeks. I mean, we had a call to arms 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the meeting last week.
Okay.
Is there anybody on the call right now who cares about this subject?
I'll admit that I care. I started reading and posted comments on one of the docs. It was maybe one of the baseline docs that the ones you're looking at refer to. But I realized that there's been a whole lot written about this, and I haven't had time to digest it all.
Right. But there's certainly been plenty of contribution from other folks in IBM on this subject. So, but is there anybody else?
Yeah. So.
I didn't say me, but go ahead.
Oh, there we go, Brian.
Yeah. So I was trying to make sense of that doc, and there's a lot of content to go through. I'm not sure that there's the proposal for the HTTP proxy as a new object, and that seems more in line with adding all the features that you would want for an ingress. What is the sort of take on the fact that the current ingress controllers don't do regex matching correctly?
So obviously there's this great big incompatibility issue in ingress, right? So most of the cloud ingress implementations don't do regex at all, right? They do glob matching and they do it differently. Some only do prefix matching. So the only thing ingress controllers could do is convert regex into the subset. And the issue today is there's no synchronous validation pipeline as part of the API, so you have to go and dig in the artifacts afterwards to find out what happened. So, I mean, your comment is right on point. Do we want the configuration to be intent-based? And then how much flexibility do you get in the intent? And if the environment can't meet the intent, what is the behavior? Does the environment try harder, or does the environment give up?
Right. Do you really need to allow input that is, has such an expressive language that the implementations don't take it all?
Well,
I mean, isn't it kind of a clue?
I mean, Nginx supports regex, ELB supports 3 wildcards in a path, and Google Cloud Load Balancer supports a prefix. So the lowest common denominator there is prefix, and that's pretty crappy.
Okay, yeah.
What most people seem to be doing to work around these limitations is they layer another stack of proxies behind the cloud one, if they care about these features. I wrote something in one of the docs about having a much more flexible intent-driven solution where we say that Kubernetes config defines the intent and we make the controller try and meet it. And that may mean injecting a layer of proxy if we wanted to, but that caused people nervousness.
Yeah.
So how do we dig ourselves out of this hole? The only other option was to say that that configs are implementation specific, which is basically what Brian is referring to, and that you can, per environment, effectively say what the environment config is. And then when you move between environments, you'll have to have overlap.
And if we're going to go that far, one of the things we talked about at the very beginning of Ingress was we would eventually come to this point when people would want custom or per backend features so much that we would be forced to implement. And we're either left with an API that is disjoint across all of the implementations, or we say, look, we're just going to fragment the API and say there's 2 APIs. There's an ingress and there is an Nginx ingress. And if you want to use Nginx specific magic, then you use the type Nginx ingress. which is, I think, where we're trending. I mean,
Yeah,
at some
or-
point, like you got to be obvious about the fact that we're doing non-portable stuff.
Right, and so through the API, it's not obvious. Right? I mean,
Correct.
it's very much not obvious, and I suspect it's bitten people.
Absolutely.
So
The number of cloud GCE cloud load balancer feature requests we get because Nginx does something.
yeah, it's substantial.
Yes.
And all the custom annotations for the Nginx ingress controller are also pretty substantial. So what would people try and do? Give up on trying to have a single config object and say that we're going to just pursue the implementation specific route?
Well, first off, you haven't necessarily said you need a different object, just maybe different syntaxes, right? So I can see two plausible options here. One is to say that there's one API, it's lowest common denominator, and if you want anything else, you put up your own tier additionally. The other is to say, yeah, it's going to be environment specific, and in the API you say which syntax you're using, and some environments will, some will say, I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Right. So, like, which of those two do people prefer? The one, obviously, if you're going to have implementation-specific config, you'll probably be forced down a path where you want implementation-specific syntax for configuring that thing, because they generally tend to favor, well, they have varying features and varying ways of expressing them and coupling them to behaviors. Or you can still try to have a more expressive Kubernetes syntax, but still declare that the features within that bound are implementation specific. So you're a little bit more prescriptive, but only slightly more.
But you're also less transparent about when you're using non-portable features, right? If you say, like, we fall into this trap today, yes. Right? The path is path or hostname, whatever. One of these is a string, and on cloud load balancer, it's a string that only supports prefix, and on everything else, it's a regex. And people put regexes in, and they're surprised when it doesn't work. And I don't like surprised users because they're never happy.
Right. So what I think we were talking about is you have a string, you have a pair, it's a tuple, a string and a type of string, right? And we may define like 3 types of string. I heard 3 common implementations, so we may define there's 3 types of string.
And 3 different fields?
Well, I was suggesting, just type of string and string as 2 fields. You could do it as 3 optional fields, each for a different type of string.
But how then do you do something that doesn't leave users surprised, right? If I say type of string equals regex and I submit it to Google Cloud, I have to know which of the, because you can actually have more than one ingress in a cluster, one ingress backend in a cluster. I have to then be able to, at admission control time, figure out which ingress you're talking about and figure out whether the string that you just selected is valid for that particular backend.
Right, and that's only the path matching feature. Right?
Yes.
There are N other features that are likely to fall into this class.
So maybe I'm transparent, but I lean towards having a specific type being a more obvious, less surprising way of doing it. It is more cumbersome, I think, overall for the developers implementing the types. But I think that it is the only way that you get to a place when users are not surprised when they spell out, Google Cloud ingress and they put in a regex and we say, well, sorry, regex doesn't work, right? Or, maybe that's a bad example because it's built into a string, right? But they turn on some esoteric feature and that feature doesn't exist because it isn't in that API, right? As opposed to them activating it and just not making it work.
All I was trying to suggest was rather than put the type at the whole object, just put the type at the string that's you need to discriminate. I'm agreeing with the general idea of explicitly saying which language you're using, but I thought I heard that it's only the string whose language matters or varies, and the rest of the object is the same.
I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true either.
I think people are abusing strings today to embed other bits of information that would properly be in the structure or the schema of the object if we let them.
Right. So I've gone through an exercise recently of defining what properties in a proper schema we might need for configuring a proxy, and it's quite detailed. Like, what if you want to do IP range matching on source, or you're going to do just exact IP matching on source? Right? Now you have a micro format in your string. Which one is it? So yeah, it tends to pile up pretty quickly.
Okay, fine. So
I guess there's a couple of things that happen as a result of this. If we do end up going with vendor-specific configs, do we still want to maintain a kind of aspirational common ground, which is no longer lowest common denominator, even though nobody may actually ever implement it?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is the same question. I'll share a doc with you from before Ingress existed and where we wrestled with exactly this. The thinking at the time was we could give them, at least for Ingress, right, edge of cluster. Now, it may not be true for internal, but we thought that for the edge of cluster sort of Ingress, we could give people a 60 to 75% useful solution. If 60 to 75% of users could be happy with the portable version, then they could pick up their configurations and move them across Kubernetes installations and be happy. And when you fall outside that 25 to 40% unhappy range, then you opt into the, well, I know I have Nginx, so I'm going to use Nginx features.
Right. So in the world of open source proxies, they're actually much more homogeneous. Right. That's the funny part.
That is.
So the other option is to say, well, Ingress is for the open source stacks, and if you want to bind one of these cloud LBs, then you have to be implementation specific. And there's actually fewer of those, and they're probably easier to manage. Plus, given the fact that people are already typically sitting them on top of Nginx for internal routing, it's already what people are doing.
Right.
So you can keep Ingress as, hey, the thing that configures the stuff that actually runs inside my cluster. And if you want a binding for a cloud LB, there's a separate resource for it.
You think that the cloud load balancer is the one that requires the separate? Oh yeah. Okay, let me think. Let me reparse what you just said. Yes.
Generally speaking, the like Nginx, HA proxy, and the other L7s that I look at are much more similar in capability.
Are they similar enough that we could negotiate a common API between them?
We may get closer to the 70% that you want than we did with the current version of Ingress.
Okay, but that would require being a separate resource from Ingress.
Yes. Yes, it would.
Okay. I mean,
I would be interested in seeing what that new resource would end up looking like. We're slowly pulling along a lot of baggage with the current Ingress that it's hard to see what that matched syntax and routing configuration should be in that world.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. Like, if you had free reign to just discard what's been done with Ingress and just start with a new resource, what would it look like? Try to cover Nginx, HA proxy, Envoy,
Never else.
That gives you 60 to 70% right there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually been going through the process, right? I mean, POSIX regex, like let's just take the example of path matching. POSIX regex matching is mostly implementable in all three of those things.
Okay.
Right. There's a couple of edge cases, but they're very unlikely. And you can always do some pre-processing in POSIX regex to say, hey, this is a prefix match or a suffix match for which Nginx would have specific syntax. Right. It's more work on the Ingress controller's part to do that, but it can do it. So they tend to all be clones of each other in terms of features.
Mm-hmm. Right. Sort of necessarily so, right?
Right. Yeah, for good reason. It's the cloud LBs that are actually the outliers.
Not for lack of want, but for lack of anybody to do them. Anyway, that's a separate gripe on my part. Okay, so is there a proposal for this internal one? I admit that I'm way behind anyway. Again.
So I guess we have a choice. We can either keep existing Ingress and just have it be the one for things that are run by a controller in your environment, and have a new resource for the cloud ones, or the other way around. And if we make ingress just the stuff for the cloud LDs, then we should dumb down the syntax markedly, or document that it's basically implementation specific, and you have to have the implementation worker for them, because they're just basically not compatible with each other.
Really? I've only used Ingress on Google Cloud, but it matched pretty well, right? The capabilities of what Google's load balancer does?
Not for path matching.
Well, okay. There is path matching. We just matching is maybe generous of a word there. Yeah.
So which would be less impactful to people? Right. Assuming this is actually a breaking API change one way or another.
Yeah. Ingress is still beta, so we have the opportunity to either.
I suspect the cloud vendors would appreciate the opportunity to have a vendor-specific config.
I don't feel equipped to answer this question. I would want to go talk to people who are using Ingress, because I only know the Google side of things, and I've only barely scratched what it's really useful for. Maybe we can reach out beyond the network SIG to like the user group or Slack or some place. We don't really have a place where we can scream at everybody, and just get some feedback on some targeted questions. And survey design is obviously a very tricky science, but maybe if we write some well-posed questions, we can get some feedback on which we think would be more impactful. Additionally, maybe we can go out. We have Google pre-sales and DevRel and other people who we can talk to who are on the field talking to customers every day. I don't know if anybody else on this call has the ability to try to gather some of that ground truth information. Kelsey pops into my brain. He talks to a lot of customers. We have Vic and others who talk to customers, and maybe we could get that sussed out through that.
I'm confused here. I thought Ingress was positioned as only an edge thing, not an internal thing already.
It is, but I think what Louis is arguing is it already does a bad enough job of that it may be worth cutting bait if that's what we're going to do.
I just do a time check. So we got 5 minutes left. We have 2 more issues left on the agenda. I think they'll go pretty quick, but we can choose to do this discussion or.
Let's do the other topics, and let's get some information on which direction will hurt less. But I think so be it resolved that we're doing something that involves a new resource. All right, Casey.
Cool. So the next topic was an external DNS incubator proposal. I'm not sure if I see anybody on the call from that, but
I don't think they are here. Do you want to talk about it? Do you want me to talk about it real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
So there were at least 3 different implementations of things that would take a Kubernetes service or a Kubernetes ingress and program some external DNS source. There was one that was built into the Amazon load balancer controller, which would program Amazon's load balancer DNS. There was one that was built as part of KOps, and there was one that was built separately as a tool called Mate. And as we were staring at whether we should add this to the Google load balancer controller, it seemed like that was maybe the wrong place for it. So we got everybody together, and everybody sort of agreed that they'll work on a incubator-based DNS controller. They'll define a set of standard annotations for a set of known resources, and those annotations will drive the controller to program external DNS. So, for example, I can create a service that I can say this external DNS name is foobar.com, and it's going through controller X. And controller X knows that it's configuring Route 53 DNS, and so it will then take that changes to that service, and it will update Route 53 in an appropriate way to make sure that that host name references that service. It seems like a neat decoupling to me. and it's cool to see two projects decide to work together. So I'm not sure there's a lot to say beyond that. They're still in the pre-incubator stage, but soon we'll create an incubator repo for them, and they'll start porting over code from the two projects. And hopefully, maybe in 1.7, we can see this available as an add-on that people can run and try it out.
So I'm interested.
I was going to say, yeah, I think I may have some colleagues who are interested in that too.
Cool. Point them my way if you like, and I will hook them up with Justin and the other guys.
Is there anything that SIG Network needs to be doing in the incubator proposal at this point?
No, I think the incubation process requires a sponsoring SIG, so I volunteered SIG Network since it's DNS, but I don't think there's anything to do here short of watch and pay attention and be aware. And like Mike said, if you have potential interest in this, maybe in the form of you have a DNS provider that you'd like it to support, then now you know it exists.
Cool. So the last topic for today was the Kubernetes features repo, where not sure who added this one, but
I added it because I was doing this for the storage SIG last week, and we were looking through it today, and I think the only thing that's scheduled for 1.6 is ESIPP to GA, and so I think if there's anything that we need to get in there, I mean, the feature freeze date was Tuesday, but I guess we could kind of sneak it in there, and we're going to be, as a PM group, going over it on Monday.
Do we want a feature to govern move to GA for network policy?
I think we would. Yeah.
Or don't we have like a network policy feature that would have that as a stage?
I think, yeah, we might have one. Maybe it got closed, so we can reopen it.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have a network policy feature. There was an overarching issue from before features was a...
Yeah, it might have predated features, so
okay.
I hadn't thought about that, but maybe it's worth creating a feature for that one.
Okay. Is there anybody who can shepherd that one through then? I'm assuming we have docs and all that fun stuff.
I can act as shepherd if you want to create a feature for it.
Okay. All right. Anything else that we're missing? Anybody can think of that they're working on, or
anything? People have significant notable features on here? Okay. This is mostly a slowdown release, right? So
yep. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, just wanted to make sure that I think that was the only one on my mind that I've heard about. Yeah. So cool. Thanks.
Cool. Well, that's our hour. So we'll meet again in 2 weeks.
Excellent. We're getting kicked out too. So thanks everyone for coming by. I will send my stuff out to the mailing list this afternoon if I can do it. Cheers.
All right, thanks. Bye.